Welcome to episode 60.
Hey, this is John Lee Dumas of EO Fire, and you're listening to Who Did That Voice, where we take an in-depth look at voiceovers.
Finally, warmer weather is here, and there is no better time than right now to book your vacation getaway with 3D Travel Company. Head on over to our website at www.whodidthatvoice.co and click the Book Now button on the left-hand side. They give a complimentary quote so you can get an idea of what it will cost to take your summer vacation. For a limited time, Who Did That Voice listeners can receive a Disney gift card for qualifying Disney and Universal trips, booked and traveled by the end of 2017. Hurry and book today so you can travel away.
Welcome to Who Did That Voice, the show where we take an in-depth look at voiceover. And now, here's your host, Trenton Larkin.
Hey you guys, this is a special shout out to all my listeners around the world. Who Did That Voice is now heard in over 78 different countries, and I can't thank you guys enough. Here in the USA and abroad, thank you for listening to Who Did That Voice. Keep listening and sharing with your friends. Hey Spider-Man fans, all month long in June, Who Did That Voice is covering interviews with cast and crew from the 1994 Spider-Man the Animated Series. You won't want to miss this month. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today's special guest was the writer, story editor, and producer on the 1994 Spider-Man the Animated Series, which aired on Fox Kids. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Who Did That Voice. Today on the show we have John Semper joining us. John, thanks so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Well, John, for those of you who don't know, is a writer, producer, and story editor. Is that correct, John?
That is correct. Yep.
And you have had a 35 plus year career, I believe.
Yes, and I feel every day of it when I get reminded of it. Yeah.
Well, I'm just stating that because you have a very wealthy history of writing and producing and story editing. And today we're going to primarily focus on Spider-Man, the Animated Series from 1994. And the very first episode that comes to mind that really hit me when I was a kid was The Menace of Mysterio. And you were a co-writer on that episode, season 1, episode 5. And, you know, I've with all these live action films they've made, they still have not brought Mysterio to the big screen. And I'm still waiting for that moment because he was such a unique character. What was it like for you being a part of this project? And were you a young boy that grew up like reading comics or?
Well, I was a young boy who grew up reading comics. And in fact, Marvel comics were an incredibly important part of my life. I am originally from Boston, Massachusetts. I used to take the subway to school during what you would consider my junior high years and my high school years.
Yeah.
Both of those periods were all in one school. So I'd take the subway every morning for about an hour, and they had those little kiosks down in the subway that sold magazines and comic books. And I started noticing, I had been a reader of DC comics, but then I started noticing that there were these interesting comics that, you know, I'd never heard of from a company that I'd never heard of called Marvel. And I remember seeing Fantastic Four #1 for sale. I didn't buy it. And I probably saw Amazing Fantasy. Although back in those days, the kiosks didn't stock everything. It's not like comic book stores today where you can walk in, you can find pretty much everything. Back in those days, it was whatever you got lucky, you know, just happened to be hanging there.
Yeah. And
somewhere along the line, I picked up one of those Fantastic Four issues, probably around issue 4. And then I also picked up Spider-Man, and they became my favorite comic books. So Spider-Man was my favorite superhero. And when I did the cartoon show, I actually did get to bring my favorite comic book hero to life. So,
well, that is fantastic. So
yeah.
Was this a project that you pursued, or were you pursued for it, or how did it come about that you got to be a part of the project?
It was sort of on and off. I happened to be and here I go name dropping. I happened to be at one of Stan Lee's Christmas parties.
Fantastic.
Because I've known Stan for a long time,
Oh, wow.
and the whole deal that night was that Jim was there because he and Stan were working together because Jim was going to be doing this big Spider-Man movie. And Margaret Lesh was there as well. Margaret was the head of Fox Kids TV.
Yeah.
And I've known Margaret for years because Margaret is actually responsible for my career as a writer when she was the head of Hanna-Barbera. She hired me and my partner Cynthia. They were all buzzing around and being excited, and there was now suddenly, and I believe it was birthed right at that party, there was this idea that Fox would do an animated Spider-Man series that would be based on this big blockbuster movie that was going to get made.
Yeah.
And I happened to be standing there right at the moment when Stan and Jim and Margaret were being all excited about this. And Margaret said, "And we'll get somebody really talented to write it," and she gestured over to me.
Fantastic.
And because this is Hollywood, I knew that meant absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Sure enough, I was working. I don't know when the time frame was, but it was sometime later. I was working on a preschool show for PBS called Puzzle Place.
Oh, yeah.
And I picked up. I was in the backyard of one of the producers, Sonia Rosario, and I picked up a Variety, and it was a big announcement inside that they were going to be doing this animated Spider-Man series for Fox, and they had already found a producer, story editor, producer, head writer. And I thought, oh, well, there goes that. I mean, and it was not me.
Wow.
It was somebody else. And I thought, well, that's to be expected. That's the way Hollywood works.
Yeah.
And then I had this weird thought. I thought, wouldn't it be great, because this is also how Hollywood works, wouldn't it be great if that guy didn't work out? And Stan called me and said, "John, you're the only person that can do this Excelsior face front." And sure enough, about a week later, Stan called me and he said, "We're having trouble making a deal, and I want to put your name into the hat." And I said, "Great." And then about a week after that, Stan called me and he said, "Well, I'm sorry to get you all excited because we made the deal, and I'm sorry to get you all excited because you're not going to be doing it after all." And I said, "That's all right, Stan. Thanks for thinking of me." And then months went by. And many months went by, maybe 4 or 5 months went by. And then I get a call from Stan out of the clear blue, and he says, "We're having trouble. This isn't working out. We're looking for a new head writer. I just told them it's got to be John Semper."
Wow. That's
And
fantastic.
that was how I got the job. And then when I got in there were a few people who were anxiously trying to get rid of me.
Oh, wow.
And I had to do battle with particularly one person. I had to do battle with that person for during the course of the first 13 episodes. So it was not an easy gig to get, and it was not an easy gig to hang on to. But after the 13 episodes, the first 13, then it became a little bit better, and everything settled down. And I signed on for the remainder of the 65. My contract was, I would do the first 13, and if that worked out, they would sign me on for the remainder of the 65. That's a short story, believe it or not.
Well, I appreciate it. It's wonderful to hear the backstory because Spider-Man on Fox Kids was one of the most epic shows ever. So it's fantastic to be able to talk with you today.
It's good to be here. I'm very happy to talk about the show. I love the show. It's a wonderful show. Let's talk about Mysterio, because you brought Mysterio up.
Yeah.
Now that's an interesting episode because there's a story behind that. So during the first 13 episodes, I was really having a hard time finding writers.
Yeah.
And I had started out thinking, I'm going to hire comic book guys. This will be the first show based on a comic book property where the majority of the writers are going to be comic book writers.
Wow.
So I called up Jerry Conway, who was in Hollywood. He was writing on Prescription Murder, the old or Diagnosis Murder, the old Dick Van Dyke show.
Yeah, love it.
Mystery show. Yeah, Jerry was one of the main writers on that. And I called him up and I said, "Would you come in and work on the pilot?" And he said yes. And then I called up Marv Wolfman, and I called up Len Wein, and a whole bunch of people, Jan Sternad, and just a whole bunch of people.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of comic book people. And For various reasons, it wasn't working out. It just wasn't working out. Jerry was wonderful with the pilot, but he was busy,
Yeah.
and a lot of the other guys just weren't having a good time. They weren't enjoying working for Avi Arad, and they just weren't having a good time. And there was a lot of grumbling, and there were a lot of people who were going behind my back out in the real world and saying the show is a mess and it's going to be a disaster and it's going to be a horrible show and all this kind of stuff. And I caught wind of that, and I actually didn't want to have those people around. So now I had to find new writers. I had to find people that I could use that wanted to be on the show and wanted to do this particular show and with enthusiasm. And I called up another showrunner, a very prominent showrunner, and I said, "Have you got any suggestions?" And he said, "Well, there's a guy, I haven't used him, but he might work out." And I said, "Okay, send him over." And the guy came over, and he was a very amiable guy, and I liked him, and I thought, "Okay, well, we'll give you a chance." And he had a few credits, not many, but that didn't bother me. He seemed amiable. At that point, when I was hiring, I just wanted people around me that would make me comfortable and that I was comfortable with, that were comfortable with me.
Yeah.
So he seemed all right, and he seemed like a good guy to have in the room. So I said, "Okay, here's the deal. I have 1 week for you to write this because we're under the gun. It's the early days of the show. I'm under a lot of pressure. I got a guy trying to get me fired, and I just, we've got to crank this out as quickly as possible." So I said, I think I gave it to him on a Tuesday, and I said, we have to have this script done by Wednesday of next week, which means you have to hand it in to me like on Monday or Tuesday.
Wow.
So that, then I can do at least a quick cursory rewrite. And I went over very carefully. I always did this on every episode of that show. Every episode started with me working out the story with the writer. So that's why when you see the episodes, you always see my name in the story by. That's because I came up with most of the stories. And I would sit with the writer, and we would talk it out, and then they'd go off and write. So they always went off and they wrote with a very clear idea of what I wanted. So I sat down with this guy and I went through it very carefully. Okay, this is what's going to happen. We beat the story out. And then he went off. So that was Tuesday. So Wednesday goes by, Thursday goes by, Friday goes by, Saturday goes by. Sunday night, I get a call from the writer, and he starts asking me all those kinds of questions. If you're a writer, you know when the questions are, "I'm just starting to write now, and I have some questions."
Uh-oh.
Okay? There were those kinds of questions.
Uh-oh.
And I thought to myself, I can't believe that this guy would be so stupid as to start writing on Sunday a script that he has to hand in to me on Monday or Tuesday. Sure enough, I get a script on Tuesday, and mind you, I have a table read scheduled for Wednesday, so I have to stand in front of all my bosses, at least, all of my production team, at least one of whom is trying to get me fired.
Yeah.
And I have to do a table read on the script. Tuesday rolls around, this guy hands in a script, and it's absolute garbage.
Oh, no.
Absolute useless garbage from page 1 until page 23. I think our scripts were running about 23 pages. Now, I can scream and yell, but it's not going to do any good. It's not like I can send him off and say, "Go rewrite this," because all I'm going to get back is more garbage. So Mysterio, the first draft of Mysterio was written by me from page 1 in 24 hours. I stayed up all night and I rewrote that script. And I've never done that again since. I've never stayed up all night and rewritten anything since, because it's first of all, it's deleterious to one's health. And secondly, nothing's that important. But at the time, that seemed really important to me to do that. So anyway, I stayed up all night. Now, when you're in a hurry like that and you're desperate, anytime there was a little chunk of action that looked like it made sense, that was in this god-awful first draft, I would use it. And there was one little chunk that at about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning I used that actually made no sense. But at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, I couldn't even process that, And sure enough, the next day in the table read, the guy who was desperate to get me fired says, Well, look at this paragraph here. What is this garbage paragraph here? What does that mean? And sure enough, I mean, I was busted because it was total gibberish. It was the gibberish that I had grabbed from the first draft, which was all gibberish. And that made me look extremely stupid in front of my peers. And I was really angry.
Oh no, goodness.
So when I watch Mysterio, and the episode, I mean, we did many more drafts after that, and by the time it ended up on the air, it was a really good episode. And that original writer's name is not on the episode.
Yeah.
Although there's a little bit of a coda to that story. We sat down when the whole thing was done. He came into my office and he sat down and he looked at me and he said, "Okay, so you want me to do another one?"
Wow.
And the answer, I just took a deep breath, and the answer was, "I'll give you a call," And but that's what I think of whenever I see Mysterio. I think of that overnight that I had to do to write that. So I actually ended up really writing that script, even though there are other names. I think I had my staff people, a couple of my staff people, come in and do one of the drafts, one or two of the drafts. But that one is really pretty much me.
Well, John, thank you so much for diving into it. Sometimes those hidden stories make all the difference in how people perceive different shows. And Mysterio's the Menace of Mysterio came off excellent. I think it was a fantastic episode by the time y'all got the final draft done. And he was just a unique character to me. I didn't grow up reading comics. So your show, the Spider-Man show you worked on, was really my introduction to Spider-Man and the world of Marvel. Honestly, I think it was kind of the Marvel Animated Universe, the MAU, way before the Marvel Cinematic Universe that you created, because we had X-Men, we had Blade, we had Doctor Strange, Daredevil, we had S.H.I.E.L.D., Fantastic Four, Iron Man, Captain America, Punisher, and War Machine, just to name a bunch of the characters you guys had in there. And it was so wonderful to see all these different characters come in. And for the longest time as a kid, I didn't realize these were all from different universes and stuff, except for the X-Men for sure. But as I got older, realizing they were all from different aspects of Marvel, it was just wonderful to see how much of a universe you guys created within that show. It was fantastic.
Well, this is one of the reasons why I think the show is important, not just because I worked on it, but because I think that it did introduce an important generation that is still out there buying comics today and being part of, very active part of the fan base. These were the shows, my show, X-Men, Batman, the Animated Series, were the shows that introduced all of you to comic books.
Yeah.
So, you all did come into Marvel through my show and through X-Men. One of the great things about my show that really doesn't happen now, or at least it hasn't happened for a while, is that I had the entire Marvel catalog available to me. So if I wanted to put S.H.I.E.L.D. in, or Nick Fury or Blade or all these different characters, then all I had to do was say, I want to do it.
Yeah.
I didn't even have to deal with the comic book company, because the comic book company was in total turmoil in 1993 and on the verge of going bankrupt. So those guys were completely out of it. I had nobody to answer to except Avi Arad and the network. And so if I wanted to use, Doc Strange, if I wanted to use any of these characters, it was fine. The only characters I ever got denied were right at the very beginning. They said, don't use Sandman and don't use who's the other? Oh, don't use Electro. They said, don't use Sandman, don't use Electro, because Jim Cameron's movie is going to use them. So I said, fine, I don't care. And then at one point I was going to use the Hulk, and then there was some talk that they were going to do a syndicated UPN show with the Hulk, which they did do.
Yeah.
And they didn't want me to use the Hulk, and I said, fine, that's okay, because I'm not a huge fan of the Hulk. And then Ghost Rider. I did an outline for Ghost Rider, and they said, well, he might end up on his own series on UPN, and Fox wasn't too keen on advertising a character that was going to end up on a rival network.
Yeah.
So we threw that outline out. But other than that, all the other, anything I wanted pretty much I could do. And then, of course, getting to use the X-Men was really kind of cool, since we were both on Fox. So, yeah, no, I had a tremendous amount of control. I always say this, after the first 13 episodes, when all the politics died down, I actually ended up having more control over the show than you could ever get today. There's no way, a showrunner could have the kind of control over a big property like Spider-Man today the way that I did back then.
Wow, that's fantastic. I mean, it really did make the difference. And, your aspects with Shield, there was a point where Shield was being attacked by Electro in the Six Forgotten Warriors series, where Electro is so powerful that he's taking down a helicarrier. And I don't think even the feature film showed Electro to be as powerful as you guys did in the animated series. It was like, holy cow, I did not remember him being so. I mean, I knew he was powerful, but I was like, I didn't remember him taking down a helicarrier by himself. Like, he was hugely ominous. Like, holy cow.
Yeah. Well, the thing was, after having been told I couldn't do Electro, by the time we got to the end of the series, it was apparent that Jim Cameron's movie was not going to get made.
Yeah.
Because there were all these legal problems that Marvel was having with Spider-Man, and whether or not they owned it. And so the movie wasn't going to get made. So I thought, well, the hell with it then. I'm going to use Electro. But I used him in my own way. Yeah, I just. Yeah. By that point, I was doing whatever I wanted because I was actually kind of very fed up with a lot of the politics on the show. And so, I created a whole new character and allowed him to be Electro. And so my Electro is really very different from the comic books. And it all led to this big ending of the Six Forgotten Warriors saga, which is one of my favorite quote unquote movies that we did on Spider-Man. At one point, I told my writers, I said, Cameron's not going to make his movie, so let's do this. Let's do a thing that I'm going to call the Spider-Man movies. And the way that it's going to work is that every 4 episodes or so, that's going to be 88 minutes of screen time, and that's movie length.
Yeah.
So let's just make movies. Let's break our stories down into 4 chunks, roughly 4 chunks, and give them a title like Six Forgotten Warriors, Partners in Danger, that kind of thing. And then one day somebody is going to figure this out, and when they release these things on video, they're going to release them as little mini movies. And sure enough, there was a company in Canada that on VHS released all of these little, mini movies as entities, whole entities with separate covers and everything. I think I have all of the VHS covers, but they figured it out. They got it. And so Six Forgotten Warriors for me, it was a movie. We used to, when we would look at the episodes when they came in and got assembled and got put together, the whole production crew would, in the early days, we were in the New World building and they had a screening room there. So the first time I saw most of the episodes of the first season was on the big screen as movies. So that was kind of cool to really, back before they were even making superhero movies, to be able to watch Spider-Man for the first time on the big screen was really very exciting.
I bet it was. Well, John, some of the other amazing shows, movies or short story arcs that you guys created that I absolutely loved were the alien costume. All 3 parts of that were amazing. Kind of seeing Spider-Man for the first time with the black suit for me was like, holy cow, what is this? And then to see Venom's character come, because again, I wasn't a comic reader, so all of this was me discovering it for the first time. And I absolutely loved the Hobgoblin stories and the Green Goblin stories. And I was so not as excited when I saw the Sam Raimi movie because the glider wasn't what I was expecting. The costume wasn't what I was expecting. I wanted to see what I had grown up with. And the gliders with the evil faces and the missiles coming out of the mouth and the pumpkin bombs, just everything was so different in the films. And I'm still waiting to see a producer, a film company make it like what you guys had, because it was, essence of the old Green Goblin from the original series, but it was a very different characterization. Neil Ross and I have talked about that with him being the Green Goblin, which was a super fantastic character. And the Secret Wars and the Six Forgotten Warriors were 2 of my absolute favorite arcs.
That's cool.
Just amazing stories that are just mind-blowing, I think, because you have Spider-Man going to these alternate realities at the end with Secret Wars and seeing the different versions of him. And I loved the Spider-Man with the silver armor that was all cocky and kind of like everyone knew his identity and stuff. And he had the spider robot. And I'm like, I would love to see a movie about that universe. Like, I want to see a feature film where they go to alternate realities and talk to other Peter Parkers, and it was cool because we've seen other cartoons bring the multiple Spider-Man thing together, but they've all had different voices. This was the same actor, Chris Daniel Barnes acting as all of himself from the
Yeah.
different universes, and it was really cool. And I loved how the last Spider-Man had no powers, and we're like, what is this dude doing here? And then he's like, I'm an actor from this reality where I'm just a character in a movie. And then he meets Stan Lee, and it's like, that is an epic ending to this series, because one thing I hate about animated shows is when they just end and they never conclude. And your show has an ending, but it's not an ending because they're like, Madam Web at the end is like, let's go find Mary Jane. You deserve happiness. It's not an ending. It's a what if. There's more that could come, but it's just, it gives closure. And I think that's what every fan wants when it comes to an amazing animated show that nobody's been able to top to this day.
Well, thank you. It's funny. Well, a couple of things you touched on. First of all, Chris is a brilliant actor.
Yeah.
And watching him record that Spider Wars with all those different Spider-Men was really great, because very few actors could have pulled that off. And he got every attitude. He got the cocky attitude, and he got every attitude. It was really brilliant. Yeah, I invented the Spider-Verse. I was the first one to do that, and that's how groundbreaking the show was. We really did a lot of things the first time. The one thing, I'm touching upon a bunch of things that you mentioned. The one thing that was very important to me was to not mess with what made the comic book great. You can't bring the comic book to screen, because that actually doesn't work. And I know that because I've written both animation and now I'm writing comics. So it's two different kinds of writing. But I wanted to bring the essence of the comics to life. And so I did not want to deviate. I didn't want to do the thing that they did in the Sam Raimi movie, where suddenly the Green Goblin doesn't really look like the Green Goblin.
Yeah.
And to me, that drives me crazy. It's like, if the thing works to begin with, why change it?
Yeah, we got a guy on a skateboard or something with goggles. It was like, what is this?
Exactly. I don't understand that at all. So it was very important to me to do the things that had been done in the comic book well, and to do them true to the comic book, but just make them work in animation. Now, the ending, of course, that's very controversial, because some people think that the ending didn't really end the way they wanted it to. They did want to see Peter finding Mary Jane. Just so that you know, I have actually just completed a script called Peter Finds Mary Jane.
Oh, wow.
And it's kind of like this long feature-length script that I made available to people who funded a crowdfunding campaign that I did for another concept called War of the Rocket Men.
Oh, wow.
Which I'm still in the middle of putting together. At some point, I'm going to make it so that script will be available to people, so that they can have closure with regard to Peter finding Mary Jane.
Oh, wow.
So there actually is now a missing final episode, in episode 66, called Peter Finds Mary Jane, written by me, and Peter finally gets Mary Jane. But I always felt that the ending that we did for the cartoon series was perfect, because it wrapped up Peter's story. It really is about Peter. And then Madam Web said, let's go get Mary Jane. So I didn't really feel that we needed to see that happen. And I know that I thought about it, but I guess almost in defiance, because one thing I always like to do is to be different. I didn't want the show to ever be predictable.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, showing him seeing Mary Jane and kissing and all that, that's just predictable. And I didn't want to do that. I also wanted to leave the door open in case by some miracle we actually did get a pickup to do more episodes, which I knew we weren't going to. But I thought, well, you never know what's going to happen. So I'll leave just a little something extra, just in case. But for me, the whole thing really was resolved. And I've said this many times. When you have a character who turns to his creator and says, I'm not the same guy you created. I like who I am. I feel complete. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
From a storytelling point of view, there's no place else to go from there.
Yeah.
So, and this is a guy who had just saved all of reality. So, but I'm glad you enjoyed those stories. I put a lot into them. They really do. Spider-Man is one of the few shows that really reflects how I think and how I like to tell stories. There have only been a few opportunities in my career where I've gotten to do it my way to a great extent. Spider-Man is one of them. Oddly enough, JJ the Jet Plane, which is a preschool show that I did for PBS, is maybe one of the other ones. And then the comic book that I'm writing right now for DC, there's a lot of me in that. But usually when you do this job, you work for hire. You're realizing other people's visions, and it's not often that you get to do it your way. So I'm very proud of that with Spider-Man.
Hey everyone, I sure hope you've been enjoying today's episode with John Semper, the writer, producer, and story editor for Spider-Man the Animated Series. Sadly, this is the end of Part 1, but tune in next Friday to hear Part 2 and the conclusion with John Semper. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please find me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram by searching Who Did That Voice. I would love to hear from you. You know, a question you might ask yourself is, where can I listen to Who Did That Voice? That's an excellent question. You can hear us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, TuneIn Radio, YouTube, and our website at www.whodidthatvoice.co. Click the Episodes tab and listen away. Well, everyone, that's all the time we have for this episode. Join us this Friday for Part 2 with John Semper, the writer, story editor, and producer of Spider-Man the Animated Series. You won't want to miss this amazing conclusion. Hey, do you ask yourself, who did that voice? Well, if you do, go to our website, www.whodidthatvoice.co, and click on the Episodes tab. Choose an actor, pick their name, and see pictures from the different characters they've voiced in their career.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next time for more discoveries on Who Did That Voice.